is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Ukraine has suspended Russian gas running through its network, cutting off a third of the supplies Russia sends to the EU.
The UK signs a new security agreement with Sweden and Finland as the two Nordic countries pursue NATO membership.
President Biden says he's considering axing Trump-era tariffs on Chinese imports to bring down prices.
Arguments over the Northern Ireland Protocol continue. Is the UK going to renege on the deal?
And one of Land Rover's bosses tells us why a world wrestling with a climate emergency needs another gas-guzzling 4x4. Ukraine has suspended Russian gas supplies running through parts of its pipeline network to Europe.
The move effectively cuts off a third of the gas Russia sends to the EU by blocking supplies at entry on Ukraine's eastern border. The national grid operator says it's taking this action because Russian troops are endangering the stability and safety of the network. Well, let's talk now to the Associated Press correspondent John Gambrell in Lviv. John, Russia's forces have controlled this gas distribution point in the Luhansk region for some time now. Why is Ukraine acting now?
Just in the last hour, we've had Ukrainian officials clarify what concern they had that led them to cut off this gas point. There are two gas points in Ukraine. One is in Ukrainian-held territory. The other is in separatist Russian-backed held territory. Now, that Russian-backed one, they say that they have been talking to the Gazprom officials, that's the Russian gas giant, warning them for weeks now that they would need to take this action because they say separatists were siphoning off gas from that point to send to a power plant to provide electricity for that separatist region. Now, they say that they offered the Russians the opportunity to use the second gas point, which is in Ukrainian-held territory, which they say could have taken this extra flow, but they describe it as Russia refusing to put the extra gas through rather than them necessarily blocking them. Now, this is a continued dispute now between the Ukrainians and the Russian officials, but they're saying that they're still willing to provide this access for Russia to reach the rest of Europe.
So where does this leave overall Russian gas supplies going through Ukraine?
Typically, before this moment, Ukraine had a contract with Russia to put through some 109 cubic meters of gas a day. Now what we're seeing is about 77 million cubic meters of gas go through. So it's down about a third. But again, Ukraine is saying that they can take the rest of that capacity and push it through the pipeline. So the Ukrainians are definitely putting it on the Russian side, but they're also saying that Russia is also intentionally trying to make the waters more murky, as they're have been trying for years to try to cut Ukraine out of its gas networks. Keep in mind that it was trying to build that Nord Stream 2 gas line that was going to run under the water to Germany. So Ukraine is saying this is all part of Russian design to try to disrupt their ability to keep the pipeline open and even earn money from transit fees from Russia, even as this war is going on.
Let's talk about the military picture. Some signs that Ukraine is retaking territory around the second biggest city of Kharkiv.
Yes, we've seen a real push by the Ukrainians over the last couple of days around that second largest city. Now, overnight, President Zelensky said that there was actually a push that got a couple more villages there and that their forces are about 10 kilometers from the Russian border. Now, military analysts say that the Ukrainians have a real shot here at pushing the Russians all the way back and then making sort of a coat hook maneuver where they would start moving down south towards sort of the rest of the front line around the key city of Izium, which the Russians have held as a node in their assault on the east. Now, I have to caution that the Russians have made other advances in other positions along that eastern edge, and they're trying to take back those villages that they've lost. So fighting remains fierce and is likely to remain that hard for the time being.
John, thanks for that. John Gambrell of the Associated Press in Lviv.
United States intelligence officials have warned that Russia is preparing for a long war in Ukraine, a sentiment echoed by the United Nations chief in Vienna. Meanwhile, in the city of Kherson, Ukraine has warned that Russia is seeking a vote on independence that Kyiv dismisses as a sham. Well, our correspondent Stuart Smith's in Moscow, and a reminder that reporters in Russia are working under laws that restrict what they can say. Stuart, some signs then that Russia's tightening its grip on the city of Kherson.
That's right. Now, consider first of all that Russia maintains it is not intending to occupy Ukraine, but the deputy head of the civilian military administration that has been installed by Russia in the region says it is broadcasting Russian television and radio. They intend to create a banking and pension system linking the region with Russia, and that they are bringing in teachers from Russia to teach school children via the Russian education system. And now he's saying he's going to try and send an appeal to the Russian President Vladimir Putin by the end of the year to have the region accepted into Russia. But unlike, for example, Crimea, he said, this would not be done via referendum after the global community rejected that as a legitimate option for Crimea. Of course, the UN General Assembly said the annexation of Crimea in 2014 was illegal. Now, that's slightly different to what the Kremlin said. The spokesperson for the president, Dmitry Peskov, said today that it would have to be a decision by the people of Kherson if they want to join Russia, and also it would need to be embedded in law and fully legally watertight for it to go ahead. Previously, the Russian foreign minister has talked about the southern cities of Ukraine having a referendum as the manifestation of democracy. This comes, if this did go ahead, the Ukrainian president said that such a pseudo-referendum would completely jeopardize any future talks on the negotiations. The Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson spoke earlier saying that they are still in discussion with Ukraine, but the Kremlin did characterize it today as deeply sluggish and very ineffective. However, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has also been speaking, and he says some good has come of these negotiations.
And to be able to cooperate both with the Moscow authorities and the Kyiv authorities to allow for the evacuation of the civilians from the Azovstal and in Mariupol, and a few others from the city of Mariupol, demonstrates that there is still a lot we can do in diplomacy.
So let's talk about these latest attempts by Ukraine to curb Russian gas exports. How will they be received in Moscow?
The Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov is trying to reassure importers of Russian gas that it continues to meet its contractual obligations and that this is not something that Russia is doing. Gazprom, the state provider of gas that runs all the gas pipelines going to Europe, says that what has taken place is on the initiative of Ukraine, that it is still willing to send gas through this particular point, and that it received no advance warning from Ukraine's operator that this was going to take place. And also it insists it cannot change, much as Ukraine would want them to, the direction of the gas to a different part of the system controlled by the Ukrainians as we speak. Now, if that isn't resolved, Ukraine is saying that potentially arbitration would be required, a legal battle, because Ukraine is demanding that the Russian operator does not send gas to this point and instead diverts the flow elsewhere. And also the operator says that the gas is continuing to flow, that there hasn't been disruption, although it is clear that some transfer of gas product has been moved and reoriented to a different part of the Ukrainian system. No country so far has declared that there has been any impact in terms of deliveries because of this latest dispute.
OK, Stuart Smith in Moscow, thanks very much.
Well, Ukraine's suspension of Russian gas supplies running through parts of its network risks major disruption to Europe's energy supply.
Ukraine has remained a major transit route for Russian gas to Europe, especially Germany. Our correspondent Juliet Mann is here to take us through some of the other significant events that have left the EU and the US scrambling for alternatives. Juliet.
Well, thank you. The pressure has been on from the start of the invasion of Ukraine to cripple the Kremlin's ability to finance the war. But since the conflict began, the 27 EU member states have spent over $25 billion on oil and $36 billion on gas from Russia. So while the European Union has been quite united on energy sanctions, are they being introduced fast enough? Let's take a look. Now, energy sanctions that started in the weeks after Ukraine was invaded. Now, on the 8th of March, Joe Biden in the United States signed an executive order to ban the import of Russian oil, liquefied natural gas and coal to the United States. A little bit later on the same month, Putin demanded payment for Russian energy contracts in rubles rather than the usually agreed dollars or euros. That was in response to all the sanctions that were imposed by the West on Russia. Then, in April, a dramatic escalation. The Kremlin cut off gas supplies to Bulgaria and Poland for failing to pay for gas in rubles and warned others could be next. Now, that decision to cut off supplies came the day after the United States and its allies pledged more weapons for Ukraine. And by now, the idea that selling gas to Europe was a business transaction with no political ramifications was widely discredited. In May, in fact, just at the beginning of last week, Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, announced plans for a complete import ban on all Russian oil, seaborne and pipeline, crude and refined. Now, such a ban would be the most sweeping and potentially significant measure unveiled since the start of the invasion. But even if it does get introduced, that won't be for a few months, maybe closer to the end of the year, which means that Russia will continue receiving huge amounts of money from the EU for now. Well, Dr. Aura Sabados is an energy expert at consultancy, the Independent Commodity Intelligence Services. Thanks ever so much for coming on the programme. Let's start with these gas flow suspensions from Ukraine to Russia. How significant is this?
Well, on the face of it, it's significant because any interruptions in gas flows could create volatility in prices and push them up, as we've seen in recent months, and we've seen indeed that the gas prices have reached record levels. There is, however, there are mitigating factors, not least the fact that spring demand is quite reduced, and there has also been a lot of liquefied natural gas coming into Europe, particularly from the US. In fact, we've seen record levels of LNG coming into Europe. The Ukrainian flows right now are at around 72 million cubic meters, so around 5 million cubic meters lower than the contracted volumes at this Suja border point that we've been hearing about, and where the Ukrainian gas transmission system operator has been inviting Gazprom to reroute the flows from the other border point where they are now suspended. And there are no signs that Russia is likely to reroute these flows going forward, which represent, as your reporters have already said, about a third of the contracted volumes via Ukraine. So under current circumstances, it's not a problem, but the problem is more likely to show itself as we approach the heating season.
Well, Ukraine is looking for a workaround. Russia says that's impossible. What do you think?
Well, on the one hand, Ukraine is still dependent on some of this Russian transit gas because it derives some revenue from it, and that at this moment money is critical. But on the other hand, let's not forget that Russia itself also depends on Europe and the transit through Ukraine, because right now the infrastructure, the whole transmission infrastructure in Russia is primarily geared towards the west. So there is a pipeline going to China, but most of the pipelines, and historically speaking, the transit was westward. So any disruptions in flows to Europe would ultimately also affect Russia, not only because Russia won't be able to get enough cash, but also because if the gas is stranded in Russia in terms of production, it might be very, very difficult to restart its production wells should there be a need in the future. So it's critical, absolutely critical for Russia to export and to produce this gas.
Now, what about the plans from the European Commission saying they're going to wean the bloc off Russian gas, albeit with quite a long time frame? What do you make of those plans?
Well, we have to separate here these plans, and as you mentioned, that we have a long-term plan and also a short-term plan. In the longer term, I don't think there's going to be a problem because we've already seen almost all countries that have access to high seas expressing an interest in either expanding the importing facilities for LNG or building new facilities. And of course, we're also likely to see more production coming from the US, from Qatar, and so forth. In the shorter term, it's going to be a bit of a problem because the infrastructure is not quite there yet. We are still short in terms of having enough regasification capacity, and also in terms of being able to secure enough gas, even if there was more LNG coming in, and let's assume that Norway would also ramp up exports, Algeria, Libya, and so forth. So in the shorter term, I would say 1-2 years, it's going to be difficult to completely reduce. And in fact, the European Union didn't even say that we're going to reduce entirely in the next year. It said about 2/3. But even so, it's going to be a bit tight. But let's see what winter will bring going forward.
Dr. Ora Sabadas, thank you very much. So it's not business as usual with Russia. And while gas prices jumped slightly in early trade on the Ukraine news, they have settled back to earlier levels. Jamie and Robin.
Juliet, thank you very much. Europe's largest energy network operator has revealed a loss for the first quarter. Germany's E.ON has blamed higher energy costs and losses in its Eastern European and Scandinavian divisions for a 15% drop in profits. But the firm says it's still on track to meet forecasts for the year despite market volatility caused by the invasion of Ukraine.
China's vehicle sales plunged almost 48% in April as COVID lockdowns in Shanghai and other cities hit production and kept buyers out of showrooms. However, sales of new energy vehicles, including plug-in hybrids and electric cars, remain strong. China's second-largest car maker, BYD, saw sales jump 164% in the first 4 months of the year.
Toyota has announced more production cuts at 8 car manufacturing plants in Japan. This comes amid the global shortage of semiconductors and other components exacerbated by the lockdown in Shanghai. The Chinese city is in its 7th week of COVID restrictions, which have severely impacted factory output.
After 20 years, Apple has pulled the plug on its iconic iPod. Many say the MP3 players transformed how people listen to music. But the trend towards streaming music services has made the device obsolete. Apple says its current generation of iPods will only be available while supplies last.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, neutrality or NATO? We're in Finland next, where it's poised to join the North Atlantic Military Alliance.
This could soon be NATO's border with Russia. It's not what President Putin planned when he sent his troops into Ukraine.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. A quick reminder that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
The inflation rate in the United States has slowed but remains close to a 40-year high. The Consumer Price Index shows a slight fall in overall rising prices in April. This all comes as President Biden says he's considering cutting tariffs on foreign imports to help fight inflation. Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett, watching events for us in New York. John, does this mean that inflation in the States has now peaked?
Well, I tell you what, I'll be talking about the markets in just a second, and it does look as if they may be going that way. But what I have to tell you first of all is that it used to be in America that the single biggest piece of economic data published anywhere at any time, actually in the world, was the non-farms jobs report that comes out on the first Friday of every month. Well, that's just not true anymore. Now it's the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, which was published this morning. That's what people are eager to hear about most of all. And it was okay, but it could have been better. Now, there's lots of numbers coming now, so brace yourself for some numbers. Year on year, okay, the CPI, the core inflation, well, not the core inflation, the consumer price inflation, which we pay in the shops and the gas stations and things, was ahead by 8.3%. Now, that is down from 8.5% in March, but it's not as good as Wall Street had been hoping for, which was 8.1%. And then the core inflation, now this is the thing that jolted the markets today, came in month on month at 0.6% when 0.4% had been anticipated. That's the core inflation from March into April. And that rather rattled the markets this morning. The reason is food and energy are up double digits in the course of a year. If you take them out, you get another core inflation figure of 6.2%. So you've got shelter pushing inflation up. You've got energy and food, which I've talked about. You've also got autos as well. And here we have a little glimmer of hope, because the Dow is presently up 200 points. Why would it be up if things are not that good? Well, the answer to that is it does appear that the way they take the inflation figure for the auto industry was rejigged this month. And they always do this. They change the way they calculate these numbers. And so it does rather look as if the auto section of this inflation data is massively up in these figures compared to how it has been in recent months. And I think that's giving the market some hope that things may not actually be as bad as they seem. So we have the Dow Jones Industrial Average up just over 200 points at this time. But, you know, the inflation, it's down a little bit, but it could have been a lot better, really.
So how likely is it that those foreign tariffs we've talked about so many times, like those imposed on China, will be removed? And how significant, if that happens, would it be?
Well, let's focus on China, shall we, for a little bit. I mean, you have to remember something. President Biden is in a little bit of trouble. Not for his own job, because that doesn't come up for 2 years, but in November his party faces the midterm elections, and all the polls suggest that they will do very badly. And the main reason for that is inflation, what I've just been talking about. It's projected to be around 7% when we get to the voting in November. And the Biden team are trying to avoid what happened to Jimmy Carter, who was president from 77 to 81. He ran into all sorts of headwinds, including the economy, which turned against him. And he told the American people if they were cold to put on another cardigan. Now, that's great advice if you're a mum, but it's very bad advice if you're the President of the United States and Carter was out and Reagan was in. And the Biden team are trying to avoid that. So he's given some speeches on inflation and nothing else over the last 24 hours or so. He did it on Tuesday. He's going to do it again today on Wednesday as well. And I think they probably had a tip-off that these inflation figures weren't as good as everybody had hoped that they might be. And what Biden is saying, by even referencing in an answer the fact that they're looking at possibly easing or lifting Chinese tariffs in particular, foreign tariffs, but Chinese in particular, is he's sending a signal to the American people that he really is pulling every lever that he possibly can in order to try and tamp down inflation. If you remember, just briefly, those tariffs against Chinese companies were put in place by President Trump, who thought that it would encourage Americans to buy American goods rather than Chinese. But, of course, it was the beginning of the inflationary process that we're now saddled with. And I think Biden is trying to distinguish his policies from the Republican policies, which he calls ultra-MAGA policies. What will happen now? Well, there's a legal review going on to discuss what they do with these foreign tariffs, particularly regarding Beijing. Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, is in favor of easing them or lifting them. Catherine Tai, the trade representative, not so much. She's concerned that Washington will lose an element of sort of leverage that it has over Beijing if they do that. We'll have to see how it all plays out. But if there is any easing of tariffs, it will be on Chinese companies and foreign companies that can ease the inflation issue here. Guys?
John, good to see you. Thanks for that. Our correspondent, John Terrett in New York.
The holiday company TUI says it sees a path to profitability after 2 years of COVID-19 travel disruption. Announcing its second quarter results, the German company said it's expecting record demand over the summer months. Our correspondent Trent Murray reports from Berlin.
Well, it's one of the giants of the European travel industry, and now TUI says it's on track for a bumper summer season. The German company, which specialises in holiday packages, owns airlines, hotels, even cruise ships. And it now says that bookings for the summer are currently at 85% of what they were in 2019, before the COVID-19 pandemic brought the tourism sector to a standstill. In fact, TUI says in the past 6 months alone, sales for the summer have firmly surpassed the same period in 2019, indicating that as lockdown restrictions loosen across the continent, so too are the purse strings of vacationers looking to swap social distancing for sunbathing. Looking at the financials for Q2, TUI is still in the red, reporting a loss before interest and taxes of close to $350 million. But they are quick to point out that that is almost half of what it was this time last year, when they lost more than $630 million. Now, barring any unexpected turbulence in coming months, TUI says it does expect to be able to get back in the black as passengers look to dust off their passports, pack their bags and take off for some fun in the sun. Trent Murray, CGTN, Berlin.
COVID, global supply chain problems, a shortage of semiconductor chips, the war in Ukraine and rising fuel prices are all plaguing the car industry. But the British-Indian manufacturer Jaguar Land Rover is hoping its fortunes will be reversed with the launch of its new Range Rover Sport. Nick Collins is Executive Director of Vehicle Programs.
Well, this is a really important product to the company, the new Range Rover Sport, the car we launched for the first time in 2005, and 17 years later it's the third generation, all new from the ground up. It's one of our highest volume nameplates in the business. It's a huge demonstration of our commitment, not just only in UK engineering, design and development, but also to UK industry and UK production as well.
We've reported on this programme almost weekly supply chain problems and chip shortages that have plagued the entire international auto industry. I wonder, let me ask you, how has Jaguar Land Rover fared, and what are you doing to cushion the blows as COVID and the Ukraine war still look set to be with us for some time yet?
Well, it's certainly been a challenging time. As you say, we've had COVID-related issues on supply chain. We've had microchip elements as well. And then, of course, the terrible crisis in the Ukraine. We continue to work really intensively with our supplier partners to resolve that. We've got a record high order bank at the moment, and we're working with those supplier partners to fulfill those customer deliveries just as quickly as we can, so we can get all these wonderful new cars directly to those customers. It is a difficult time. We just continue to work really intensely with those partners to achieve those goals.
I wonder if you're changing the way you work. Are you reshoring, to use the vernacular? Are you bringing production closer to where you make the cars, rather than relying on rather fragile international supply chains?
Well, one of the wonderful things about the new Range Rover Sport is it, as you say, built right here in the UK, and even the engines in it, built right here in Wolverhampton as well. So it really is a UK dominant supply chain into the car. The supply chain challenges have caused all of us to reinvent the way we do our business and rethink not just supply chains, but the way we operate the company as a whole. It's actually, within a difficult time, but a really exciting time to generate new opportunities of how we operate as a business.
Let me ask you about the next chapter. Let's talk about electric vehicles. Electric vehicles professed by the industry to be the environmentally responsible future. But let's be honest, mining for components, the manufacturing process, shipping these cars around the world, and there's urban pollution coming off the tyres, disposal of batteries and plastic at the end of their useful lives. None of it really addresses the environmental damage the sector continues to be responsible for, does it?
Well, look, we're on a journey here. It's a transportation journey, and we play a part of that. Our commitment as a business is net carbon zero by 2039. Our Jaguar brand will be all EV from 2025. And as I said, this will be the second of 6 all-electric Land Rovers when this car goes on sale as an EV dedicated version in 2024, with our electric hybrid available to order straight away. We do see EV as a key element of decarbonising the economy. But of course, there are supply chains we need to work through. There's the sourcing of the raw materials. And we're working with all of our partners in that space to ensure that we stand for the highest sustainable standards as we go forwards. You know, we will be a modern luxury company. We believe in being a sustainably rich company. And they're some of the fundamental and foundational pillars for us as a business as we go forwards.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Millions of people, young and old, have fled Ukraine's war. What does it mean for the future of the country after hostilities end?
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the second year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. The UK has agreed security deals with Sweden and Finland, pledging Britain's support should they come under attack.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the pact will also allow them to share more intelligence and military exercises. Johnson is on a visit to both countries to discuss Ukraine and the 2 Nordic countries' NATO membership. Well, our correspondent Michael Voss is in Helsinki. So, Michael, firstly, tell us more about the Security Pact.
Well, as you say, Robin, the reason that Sweden and Finland want to join NATO is the security that's given through Article 5, which says that an attack on one is an attack on all. But there is a big gap between when they apply for membership and when they actually get it. And in that interim period, they're not covered. So what Boris Johnson has done in both countries is reassure them that should anything happen in that interim period, then Britain would step in and help intervene. He's not the only one. The Americans and several other NATO countries have done so. I think what we are seeing here is a real firming up of Western defence strategy.
Finland's armed forces are closely aligned with NATO. They've been holding joint exercises here for the past week, but they've never wanted to join the organisation until now. The conflict in Ukraine has changed all that. The Finns no longer trust Moscow and want the protection NATO offers, where an attack on one is an attack on all. Finland's President Sauli Niinistö is expected to give his approval on Thursday to ending decades of neutrality, bringing major changes to the strategic balance of power in Europe.
This is where East meets West. I'm on the Finnish side of the border, and just over there is Russia. This could soon be NATO's border with Russia. It's not what President Putin planned when he sent his troops into Ukraine.
Finland's border stretches 1,300 kilometres from the Baltic Sea to the Arctic and would double NATO's presence next to Russia. Ilkka Tuomiko is in charge of the country's busiest border crossing with Russia. But with first COVID and now EU sanctions, there's very little traffic.
This was the biggest border crossing point, Finnish east border. There was about 3 million border crossings in a year, and now there are about 10% of those numbers.
Have you noticed any changes on the Russian side in terms of forces or patrols?
Not that kind of changes. The situation here at the Finnish east border is very stable at the moment. What we can see here at the moment, there are coming Ukrainian citizens from Russia to Finland to applying here temporary protection.
Lappeenranta is the nearest large town to the border, with many Russians married to Finns or owning property here. Opinions here are divided about joining NATO.
We don't mind. I think that Finnish people have to decide how better for them. It's their decision.
I'm against of it, absolutely, because I understand that we are too close to Russia.
There could be an economic price to pay. Russia is threatening to cut off gas supplies to Finland. It may also close this industrial canal which runs from Finland to the Baltic Sea through Russia. It's a major export route for Finnish wood and paper products. This border could soon become the next front line.
So, Michael, the UK Prime Minister and the Finnish President are speaking to the media now about the security pact. But how close are Finland and Sweden to ending their military neutrality and joining NATO?
Well, opinion polls here, for example, last year said that just 28% of Finns wanted to join NATO. There was a new poll this week, and it's right up to 76%. I think it would be a real shock if the Finns don't join. The Sweden, less so. It's about 50-50. And, for example, the Women's Caucus in Parliament say they're opposed to it. Remember, Sweden has had its neutrality, has been neutral for about 200 years, whereas Finland only since the end of World War II.
Michael Voss in Helsinki, thank you very much.
Well, the invasion of Ukraine is having a devastating impact on employment with massive job losses. That's the warning from the International Labour Organization. The impact is also being felt further afield with concerns about labour markets in neighbouring countries. The United Nations agency says nearly 5 million jobs have been lost in Ukraine, equal to 30% of previous employment levels as people have fled the country. And those employment losses could get even worse if there is a further military escalation in the next 3 months. The ILO estimates unemployment would increase by almost 44% to 7 million. But if the conflict was to cease immediately, the recovery would be rapid, with around 3.5 million jobs returning to the economy. The impact is also being felt further afield, with millions of refugees moving to neighbouring countries. Those that end up staying could put a squeeze on the available jobs. In Poland, which has taken in the most refugees, unemployment there could rise from 3 to over 5%. Moldova's 2.9% rate could hit almost 7%. Meanwhile, there's a significant ripple effect in Central Asia. In 2020, over a fifth of Russia's 12 million migrant workers were from Kazakhstan, with most sending a significant portion of their wages back home. The World Bank estimates remittance payments to Kazakhstan will decline by a third this year. Job losses in Russia could also see those workers return home, putting additional stress on job markets. Well, Heinz Koller is from the International Labour Organization, and I asked him whether the employment losses in Ukraine would be temporary or permanent.
Well, that's actually a very good question. We don't know yet is the answer to this. However, what we are seeing are serious attempts of the government to relocate jobs and businesses from conflict zones to more calmer and safer havens in the Ukraine. And there, the big advantage of the Ukraine is it's a very, very big country. So the ILO is also supporting these relocation effects of the government. But that remains to be seen whether this is lasting. If there is a resolution in a few weeks, we can see already, or we predict that the job losses will drop to 8.7%, which is a lot less. And probably in terms of reconstruction, if you really have a lot of very labor-intensive reconstruction works, I mean, you have seen the destructions in the country, then the job losses might be even less, provided there's peace.
And if young Ukrainians who have, for obvious reasons, fled the country do not return home, what does that mean for the country long term?
Well, first of all, we have to say most of the people, it's a bit more than 5 million, 5.5 million at the end of April, are actually women, children, and men over 60. So most of the young men actually are staying behind. What we are seeing is already now a certain return of young people to the countries, in particular young women who want to join their families. However, it would be obviously a massive brain drain for Ukraine towards, in particular, the European Union. Again, it's too early to predict what's happening because we do not know how this crisis and how this conflict and this Russian aggression is going to end.
Peace is obviously the easy answer to this crisis, but let me ask you, what can global institutions like yours do to improve this?
Well, first of all, you have seen the mission of the Secretary General of the United Nations to Moscow and to Kiev, so there is a lot of negotiations and discussions going on. As far as the ILO is concerned, we can, first of all, help our constituents, which is the government, the workers and the employers' organizations, to provide, first of all, humanitarian aid. Secondly, we can help about the relocation project I talked already about. Third, we can already start thinking about appropriate reconstruction programs after this conflict ends.
The difficulty is an uneasy peace with a neighbour like Russia may not be enough to win back the confidence of people who have fled Ukraine, and that must be a very real concern.
To be honest with you, as I say, we are surprised to see already quite a high number of refugees coming back to the country. And again, the advantage is that it's a very big country and many areas are only very little affected. However, we are on the ground as ILO. We have our staff in the country and we are doing our best to build up this kind of confidence. But again, it needs to be on the basis of a peaceful resolution of that conflict.
The UK has rejected a European Union proposal to resolve a standoff over post-Brexit trade rules for Northern Ireland, claiming the changes would make things worse. The British government has been threatening to scrap part of the Northern Ireland Protocol after the EU insisted that renegotiating the deal is impossible. Well, our correspondent Ryan Thompson has been following events from Brussels. But first of all, let's talk to Andrew Wilson. So, Andrew, the UK government may announce on Friday that it will breach its post-Brexit treaty obligations. How likely is that, and what would a breach involve?
Well, up until lunchtime today, there was every chance that this was an element of brinkmanship. The UK did have some plans to actually set aside separate legislation to put through Parliament while continuing with negotiations with Brussels. That separate legislation, an alternative to the protocol, something that the EU would have been extremely annoyed about. And had that plan gone ahead, or if that plan does go ahead, we can expect retaliatory action from the European Union fairly swiftly after that, in terms of cooperation on financial arrangements, financial institutions, perhaps some stuff on fishing rights. You know, a trade war could start. But then today, Joe Biden's people in the White House met with a trade envoy from the UK to discuss Britain's plan, and the president appears to have stepped in and expressed his concern about what the UK is planning to do. Don't walk away from this. Show leadership, says Joe Biden. He's got deep concerns about, one, protecting the protocol and at the same time protecting the Good Friday Agreement. That shot across the UK bows may be enough to persuade the government to carry on negotiating in good faith with the European Union for the time being. The Americans have also put pressure on the Germans and the French to say, maybe you can cut the British some slack, maybe there's a way that you can give some more away in terms of how the protocol is run. But thus far, the standoff may have been changed slightly by this intervention from the American side.
So, Andrew, how important is the position of Northern Ireland's unionists in the government's thinking?
Well, the unionists are at the centre of this whirlwind. For a start, they'd already pulled out of cooperating in any kind of power-sharing agreement in terms of the government in Stormont. They'd said they're not going to do anything else on the political front. They're going to paralyse the system of government in Northern Ireland until the protocol is changed to their satisfaction. Now, of course, after the recent elections, they are not the largest party in the Assembly anymore. They're the second largest party. They're still refusing to cooperate, but now there is, if you like, a senior party that's making its own feelings felt, and that's the nationalist Sinn Féin, who are quite happy with the protocol, to be honest. Sinn Féin has started to accuse the unionists of paralysing the country, punishing the society, holding the society to ransom, and so the language is starting to get a lot rough on that side as well. But the unionists are deeply concerned that unless they carry on with this lack of cooperation, that they're not going to get the help they need from Westminster in their dealings with Brussels.
Andrew Wilson, many thanks.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Ryan Thompson following these events in Brussels. Ryan, what's been the response there to the suggestion the UK might withdraw from the Northern Ireland Protocol?
Hi there, Jamie. Well, the European Union and the commissioners have made it clear that the European Union is not ready to stretch itself thinner in order to make this deal work. You know, a key word in the discussions on both sides has been creativity, because, of course, these two political points are very far apart, and so it's going to take a degree of creativity in order to allow the deal to work a way for both sides to be okay with it. The EU says it has worked tirelessly on these creative solutions, but also durable solutions, and they're just not seeing the same feedback from the United Kingdom. They want the UK to show the same level of determination, but also this degree of creativity in order to meet them in the middle, see if there can be an accord here, or at least an accord of principle. EU negotiators has made it very clear that renegotiation is not on the table. They want to find an agreement that can work given the current framework that's been laid out and agreed to previously.
Well, the UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is going to be talking to the EU negotiator Maros Sefcovic tomorrow. Realistically, what's the likelihood of them reaching any agreement?
Well, Jamie, these two sides are still very, very far apart. Even though they've agreed to an accord in principle, several policies and ways to make this work, they're really struggling to work out the sticking points here. The EU asserts that it has done what it can, these creative solutions like modifying certain ins and outs of its own laws, really trying to give a breath of fresh air to these negotiations, and they say they're just not seeing the same degree from the UK side. They will point likely on this call tomorrow to say what's done is done. It's time for the UK to step up, but this really will be a difficult negotiation. We're not likely to see a big outcome out of it, and this will likely carry on into the next week as this becomes a political issue within the United Kingdom. And of course, the political change in Northern Ireland has only complicated the situation further.
Ryan, no doubt see you at exactly the same time tomorrow night. Ryan Thompson there in Brussels.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, going underground. In Switzerland, the war in Ukraine has sparked renewed interest in nuclear bunkers.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown. As they do so,
there are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas. So it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
Is the front line now after 9 days of fighting?
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
the front line. Within clear view of this front line position.
Have you ever wondered how much a human life is worth?
Have you ever looked up at the night sky and considered whether aliens are staring back? Or if it's even possible to measure intelligence?
If that sounds like you, it's time to join the Answers Project with me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge.
We've recruited the best brains in the world, award-winning astrophysicists, giants of medical science, and former presidential advisors to help us tackle humanity's biggest questions.
Find the answers wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. China has defended its zero-COVID policy after the World Health Organization chief criticised the hardline measures, calling them unsustainable.
The Foreign Ministry spokesperson called the remarks irresponsible and claimed China's policy is scientific and effective.
China's general policy is not to ensure zero infection, but to control the pandemic situation in the shortest time at the lowest social cost. This is to ensure as little disruption as possible to people's health, work, and personal lives. We need to effectively ensure the safety and health of more than 1.4 billion Chinese people.
Shanghai's Disease Control Center says its strict imposition of COVID-19 quarantine measures must continue. Stricter lockdown measures can force neighbours of positive cases to move into central quarantine facilities, even if they've tested negative. And commercial food deliveries have been banned. The measures are now in their 7th week as authorities try to contain China's largest COVID-19 outbreak.
A journalist for the news network Al Jazeera has been shot dead while reporting on an Israeli raid in the occupied West Bank town of Jenin. Palestinian-American Shireen Abu Akleh was one of the Arab world's best-known reporters. Al Jazeera says she was targeted by Israeli forces, while Palestine's president said the Israeli government is guilty of carrying out an execution. Israel says it's likely she was killed by Palestinian gunfire.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine has made many Europeans consider how well their government could protect them if a war broke out.
But Switzerland is already prepared. By law, there must be enough space in underground bunkers to accommodate the entire population of 8.6 million people. Our correspondent Natalie Carney reports.
Hidden away from enemy eyes. Sometimes they are located deep in the forest, sometimes deep in urban areas. One thing is certain, they are everywhere. According to Switzerland's Federal Office for Civil Protection, there are around 360,000 bunkers of varying sizes across the country, from private buildings to public ones. This one, in the city of St. Gallen, is located in a new residential block.
With more than 38 rooms, then one is in principle obliged to build a shelter with the cost borne by the developer. If there are enough shelters in that area, then you can pay a compensation levy.
The size of the space is calculated by 1 square meter for each person registered to use it. It must be equipped with double blast doors, an air filtration system, dry toilets, and enough beds. Owners may do what they want with the space when not in use, but must be able to transform it into a usable shelter within 5 days. Most importantly, shelters must be able to withstand the effects of modern weaponry, including nuclear, biological, and chemical attacks, a growing concern for many.
Yeah, before the shelters were not very much in focus of our population,
But with the crisis in Ukraine, we got a lot of phone calls. A lot of people were very anxious and wanted to know where they can go to in case of incident. Yeah.
The history of bunkers in Switzerland dates back to the Second World War. When the Nazis started invading neighboring countries in 1939, the Swiss military dug over 20,000 bunkers to buttress the Alps with fortifications.
Some older bunkers have been repurposed for a variety of functions, from a contemporary hotel to a data center, a cheese cellar to even a mushroom factory. This Second World War fortress is now the Heldsburg Fortress Museum.
It was built between 1939 and 1941 to accommodate roughly 200 soldiers inside and a further 400 outside.
Yes.
The war in Ukraine has sparked renewed interest in the 1,000 meters of underground tunnels and rooms that make up this fortress.
We had 3 queries whether it would be possible to live inside here in case of emergency. Yes, there are more queries nowadays because earlier we had none at all. Switzerland is in the heart of Europe, in a peaceful continent, and there was no question about until some weeks ago.
With a few quick updates, Goop says the facility can be used as a bunker for the local population for up to 3 weeks.
If you have food in it, absolutely. We have a machinery room, we can produce electricity. We have a water storage, a reservoir with 110,000 liters. There is a hospital, there is a canteen, there are dormitories for almost 200 beds.
The war in Ukraine has forced many governments to assess not only their military resources, but how they would protect civilians in the face of an attack, something that was unthinkable just a few months ago. People here are of course hoping they will never need to use the bunkers for their intended purpose, but knowing that they are there adds a sense of security. Natalie Carney, CGTN, St. Gallen, Switzerland.
Ukraine has qualified for the final of the popular international songwriting competition, the Eurovision Song Contest, and they're favourites to win. Folk rap group Kalish Orchestra will be performing their song Stefania. Support for the band has swelled since Russia's invasion, with Moscow banned from this year's contest. Fellow acts were keen to show their support for Ukraine, waving the national flag. The final will be held on Saturday in Italy.
One lucky winner in the UK has won the Euro Millions jackpot, becoming Britain's biggest ever lottery winner and pocketing $227 million.
The ticket holder will be richer than some British celebrities, including the singer Adele, and could now buy 4 Caribbean islands. Lottery operator Camelot has confirmed the lucky player has come forward to claim the prize. The previous record holder chose to remain anonymous after winning $210 million.
The headlines again. Ukraine says it has suspended Russian gas running through its pipeline, cutting off 1/3 of the gas Russia sends to the EU.
The UK signs a new security agreement with Sweden and Finland as the 2 Nordic countries pursue NATO membership.
And President Biden says he's considering axing Trump-era tariffs on Chinese imports to bring down inflation.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.